Right, welcome to our first lesson on collecting data. We're moving on to the topic of statistics. Sometimes they call it data handling. So the first thing you need to do is to basically know what the topic is about. The topic is about collecting the kind of data, then analyzing it to find out what you're trying to find out. Okay, so I'm just going to use an example quickly to help us understand all these key terminologies that we're having here. The first one is what data is. The second one is processing, interpreting data. The other one is data handling, primary data, secondary data, and so on. So I'm just going to use a case for you to understand what we're going to be doing today. So the first thing, I want to pretend that in a class of 30 students, I've got 30 students in a class. I've got 30 students in a class. Maybe they're year 11 students or year 10. And what I'm interested to do is to find out which amongst them, whether it's the boys or girls, that are better in maths, right? So I've got girls and I've got boys in front of me, and I want to find out whether boys are better in maths than girls. So that's what I want to find out, okay? So the first thing is that I need to have what I call hypothesis, right? I need to have what hypothesis is. Now, hypothesis is basically a statement which you believe in and you want to test to find if it's true. For example, I can say that boys are better than girls in maths. So that's the hypothesis. I believe it, so I want to test it, right? So hypothesis is basically a statement that you believe in and you want to find out whether it is true or false. So that's hypothesis. And I've given the example that I believe that boys are better in maths than girls. So that's the hypothesis. Okay. Now, now to test hypothesis, you need to first decide what data you need to collect, right? So I've decided on the hypothesis, which I believe that boys are better in maths than girls. Now, what data, what information am I going to collect to prove that or to disapprove that? Okay, that's what data we're talking about here. Okay, and then how am I going to collect it? So, what data I need here? I could need information like the test scores, the test scores of for the boys and for the girls in a recent math test or something. Okay, so it's basically the test score. That's what the data I'm going to need here. Okay. Now, how am I going to collect it? There are two ways I can collect this. I can collect it as primary data, or I can collect it as secondary data. So primary data is data that you collect yourself by doing a survey or an experiment. Okay. So what I could do in this class is that I could go to these boys and girls and I could ask them what marks they scored in the last test they did, or I could give them a test myself and then mark it and find out. So I'm doing that myself. I'm collecting the data myself. If that's the case, then we say this is primary data. Is the data you collect yourself firsthand. And I can give them a test to do, or I can just ask them to tell me what marks they got and I write down. Okay. The other way I could do it is that I could do it as secondary data, which is the data that has been collected by someone else. So what I could do here is quickly just go to their teacher and the teacher will print out their results for a recent math test. So that data has been collected by their teacher who gave them the test, they did it, he marked it, and he recorded it. So I just got the teacher and they just print it out for me. If that's the case, then that's secondary data. Okay. Now, once I've got that data, then I can process the data. I can draw tables, I can draw graphs from the data, and then I can interpret the data. So interpreting the data basically means telling me what really is this data telling me, right? So I could work things like mean for the boys and mean for the girls, and then I can just compare that. Once I've compared, then I can conclude whether it's boys or girls that are better, right? Now, so what I've been talking about here is what we call data handling cycle. And data handling cycle starts with what we call planning, what data to collect, right? So I'm going to be planning how to collect the test score for these students. That's my plan. Then the next thing I'm going to collect it. Collecting it means I could do it primary or secondary. So I could, give them the test, then mark it myself, or I could ask them what they scored, or I could just go to the teacher and then the teacher will print it out for me. So I'm collecting data there. The next thing I could do is to process the data, which means I could work out things like mean, range, median. I could draw graphs from that data to help me understand what the data is telling me. Then after that, then I can interpret it. So I could compare the mean for the boys and the mean for the girls. So then I can draw conclusion. Okay. So this is called data handling cycle. Okay. Right. So what kind of questions are they going to ask in the exam? It says here that John wants to test whether six-sided dice has an equal chance of landing on each of its sides. Explain how he could collect data for the test. Now, will this data be primary or secondary? He's got a six-sided dice and he wants to know whether each side has it's got equal chance of landing. How is he going to prove this? Okay, so how is he going to collect the data here? I would suggest he will need to do an experiment. Okay, so you need to do an experiment of throwing the dice. And the dice could land on a 1, on a 2, on a 3, on a 4, on a 5, or on a 6. Then what he could do, just study. You can just throw the dice maybe 60 times or something and just keep tallying. Pretend it landed on 1 3 times, on 2 twice, on 3 maybe 5 times, on 4 once, on 5 maybe 4 times, and so on and so on. Okay, so he's got to do this experiment and work out and see how many times is this thing landing on a 1, on a 2, on a 3, on a 4, on a 5, or on a 6. If they are equal, then he can now say, okay, I've proved that this die has got equal chance of landing on any side. Okay, now the data is going to collect, I believe here is going to be primary because he's going to need to do this himself. Okay, so that's how I would answer that kind of a question. So the answer to part 1 has been written there. If you just want to look at the wording, and then the answer to part 2 is also written there if you just want to look at the wording. Okay, all right, so what I want you to do now really quickly, I want you to try question 1 all the way to 5. For each question, you have to do part A, which says describe what data is needed and give a suitable method for collecting it. Part 2, say whether the data will be primary or secondary. So for number 1, it says Nikita wants to know what the girls in her class think about school dinners. So you need to describe what data she will need and explain how she's going to collect that data and whether the data is primary or secondary. So I want you to pause the video and just try question 1 all the way to question 5. Okay, so let's try a couple of questions. So question 1 says, Nikita wants to know what the girls in her class think about school dinners. So number 1, describe what data is needed. So what data do you think she needs here? I know that the data she needs here would basically like answers to a question. She's going to ask them in a questionnaire what they think about school dinners. She's going to design a questionnaire with some questions in there, and the girls will answer. And one of the questions could be whether the girls think that the school dinner is good, bad, or don't know. So those kind of questions. So then she has an idea. Now, give a suitable method for collecting it. I've just mentioned she can use questionnaire. So put questions in a questionnaire and then give it to students to answer that. Then say whether the data will be primary or secondary. I believe the best one here will be primary because she's designed a questionnaire and she's giving the students to answer herself. So that's basically primary. She's collecting herself. Okay. So that's how I'll ask that kind of a question. Now let's pick another one. Let's pick question 4. Rohan wants to test his theory that the boys in his class can throw a ball farther than the girls. Right? In other words, it's as if the boys are stronger than the girls. So maybe he believes like that. So he wants to test this one. Right? So describe what data is needed. What data is he going to need here? He's going to take some measurements. He's going to get the girls to stand at a point and the boys to stand at a point, and he's going to give them a ball each one, and they're going to throw as far as they can. And then Rohan is going to measure how far the ball has fallen from where the boy or the girl is. Okay. Now, this is going to be primary data again because he's going to collect it himself. Or even if they collect it for him, still it's primary data because he's the one who is organized it. They're doing it experimentally. So describe what data is needed here. The data is basically a measurement of how far the ball has fallen from the boy or from the girl who is throwing it. Give a suitable method for collecting it. It's an experiment. Get the girl or the boy to stand somewhere, get them to throw the ball, and just measure how far it is. So that's how to collect it. And you can basically record the data in a sheet or in a table. Part B, say whether the data will be primary or secondary. Again, Rohan is the one doing this, or is getting the boys and the girls to help him do it. He's still doing it primarily. Okay, so that's the answer to these questions. I'm going to show you the answers. If you want to pause your video and then just basically compare your answers to the ones that are written on here. So pause the video and compare your answers to the ones that are written here. So notice that they've really provided details here. For example, here, he could measure the distance and record them in a table, along with whether each thrower was a male or a female. Because if you're taking a record, you need to know whether it was a male or a female. Okay. And the ball has to be the same. So you're gonna just basically use one ball, because if you're using two different balls, then it might not be fair. One ball could be bigger than the other one or could be heavier than the other one. Right? So use the same ball. So provide as many details as possible. Okay. Right, so hope you got that. So that's our first lesson on collecting data. Thank you.